So thank you everyone for coming along today to this session. Looking forward to a really interesting discussion today. As you know, we'll be launching our first 2 special interest groups as part of ASPA, and we'll also be putting out a call for any new ASPA ideas. So I'll just quickly go over what we intend to cover today. So I'm just going to very briefly at the start give a background and introduction to ASPA and the nature of SIG, so it won't take too long there, but just to give everyone a bit of context for the next 2 speakers, who will be Harriet and Karen, who will be starting at the Scaling Up Physical Activity SIG, or SUPA SIG. They've reserved the best possible name. Good on them. And then the next one will be the Physical Literacy SIG, Lisa and Pierre, which they'll explain a bit about the objectives of that SIG. And that's when I will call for some new SIGs at the end. I'll give you some instructions about what you might do if you are interested in inquiring about setting up your own SIG within ASPA. We also hope to have some time for some discussions, some question and discussions. I think I probably will ask for questions after each of the SIGs finish their presentations, and then of course again at the end for any questions about new SIGs. So ASPA, what is ASPA? So ASPA, we have a vision in ASPA. It's quite a long vision, but there it is: to advance knowledge and integration of physical activity into health, education, urban planning, and transport practice and policies across all levels of government and non-government organisations in the Australasian region, in order to benefit the health and well-being of all communities across Australia, New Zealand, and Southeast Asia. So we're planning to do a lot. We're covering a lot of areas, a lot of regions, but we feel that this society is really valuable. It's going to be very valuable in upcoming years. Obviously, it's only just started, really. We've only had about 12 months or so in operation, but already we're making some really good progress in bringing lots of groups together across the region. And our mission is to provide a forum for researchers, practitioners, and policymakers to advocate, network, build capacity, and share expertise and experiences, and hear about the latest research and practice in physical activity in Australasia. So there is very much a focus on bridging the academic world and the policy and practice world. So we're very much, and we see that in our membership numbers now. This isn't just an academic network, it's very much rooted in the real world. And we're hoping to be able to use some of the research that's happening at the moment in our academic world and translate it into action all across the region. Our membership is still increasing. We had a big boom at the beginning, and it's steadily increasing now. This is the latest data from this month. So over 120 members now. And you can see most are enrolled for a year, but there are a few 3 and 2 year enrollments. There's actually a lot of non-government agencies enrolled in this membership, which is excellent to see. It's not, as I said before, it's not just an academic exercise. We are seeing a lot of integration between practice and academia. And we also are hoping to see a few more of the other regions of Asia, Pacific Islands, and New Zealand increase in this membership as well. Very quickly, you may have seen this in the AGM, but I just wanted to reinforce it here that there's a fantastic group of people behind this, led by Joe, who's a workhorse behind the scenes. There's a lot of different committees that we're involved with: the Membership Committee, Early Career Committee, Southeast Asia, of course the SIG Committee, which I'll talk about in a second, the Scientific Program Committee, Communications and Advocacy, and regular observers as well. So if you have any interest in any of these areas, be it communications advocacy, please feel free to get in touch with those who are the chairs of those committees. Always looking for extra help, and especially if you have some expertise in those areas. The SIG committee, so this is the committee that I'm chair of. Cornel and I chair this committee, Cornel Vantanalotti from Queensland, CQU. And so what we are planning to do here in this committee is really to provide some sort of oversight and advice to the EC on any activities that are related to SIGs. So the formation, administration of ASPA SIGs, which we've been involved with the last 6 months, individual SIG reporting. So there is a SIG reporting process, which I'll explain a little bit about as I go, and then administration of SIG funds. So that's another question I often get when people are inquiring about SIGs: is there funding behind it? And the intention is yes, there will be. We haven't finalised the exact amount at this point, given that the SIGs are just starting up now, but there will be some funds allocated to each SIG annually, which requires them to report on. And of course, SIG committees will help, will develop an annual work plan and implement strategies endorsed by the EC to achieve the purpose. So we have an annual work plan as well, which we intend to fulfil. And what is the purpose of SIGs, ASPA SIGs? The idea for SIGs, I guess, was conceived pretty early in the conception of ASPA, and I think it was emerged from some of the examples we've seen in other societies, international societies, such as the International Society of Behavioural Nutrition and Physical Activity, or ISBNPAR, which has a number of SIGs, I think up to 10, I think about 10 SIGs now. And also ISPA, so the International Society of Physical Activity and Health, they have councils. So there is a precedent to have slightly more bite-sized collections of people to break off individual topics that they're interested in. So there are a number of purposes that we see that we've listed in our, I guess, our terms of reference for SIGs. And the main reason is to provide a platform to discuss, disseminate evidence, and promote networking and collaboration on issues related to a specific topic. We had a discussion actually last week in the EC meeting about the breadth or narrow or scope of the specific topics that we'd be promoting. I think we're quite interested in promoting topics that are actually quite specific, quite narrow, related to a very, I guess, a narrow body of work rather than broad SIGs that take over a whole age range or something. So as you'll see, I guess, in the upcoming new two SIGs. We'd like to support the development of postgraduate researchers and emerging researchers and practitioners by facilitating student and early career researcher, early career practitioner networking and mentoring. So that's a big part of what SIGs do. They facilitate the upskilling of young researchers or new researchers, and there's usually a mentorship system in there as well. We'll enhance communication and collaboration between academics and practitioners in a specific field. Support the dissemination and translation of research and evidence into practice and policy. Support the promotion and uptake of practice-driven evidence generation. To publicly advocate for positive societal impact via social media and position statements. And there will be the provision to allow SIGs to post things and to have their own presence online. And to offer professional support through relevant conferences, seminars, and workshops. Okay, so that's quite a big part of the SIGs as well, to have an annual plan of things, seminars, workshops they'll run throughout the year. One of the questions I do often also get is, are these SIG events open to the public, or are they restricted to SIG membership or ASPA membership? And the short answer is a bit of both. We're quite interested in some public events to obviously generate interest in ASPA, to increase membership, to allow you to spread the work you're doing to a wider audience. But then again, we also wanted to keep something in-house as well to provide some additional benefit for our members. So that's something that will be negotiated within each SIG. So SIGs do have responsibilities as well. So what we expect SIGs to do is obviously communication. There's a lot of communication that goes on within SIGs, and the SIG leaders are very familiar with this. Communication by email, ASPA newsletters, social media, and then we would intend all SIGs to have a meeting. I should have put face-to-face in inverted commas really, because of this day and age. It may not be face-to-face. We're hoping face-to-face meetings will occur during the annual ASPA conference. So there is this intention that we will have an annual conference for ASPA, and within that, we will have the opportunity for SIGs to meet. So 4 weeks prior to the ASPA annual meeting, we also expect to have an annual report submitted by each SIG, which reports on achievements, progress, and requested support for what we call a 3-year plan. At the start, it'll be a 12-month plan, but we also expect to see some sort of 3-year plan of where the SIG tends to go in terms of membership, ideas, progress, advocacy, that sort of thing, just to provide some sort of direction to the SIGs. And then for the SIG leadership team, we would hope to see a chair or co-chair, some academic officers, practitioner officers, and student officers, and they all must be ASPA members. So we are trying to capture, I guess, a wide range of expertise and career progression as well within that. It's also would be obviously very beneficial for SIGs to encompass multiple countries, multiple areas, so that we are truly, I guess, a regional organisation. So how would you get involved with the SIG? Well, as per about an hour ago, Sam has kindly put up a special interest groups page on our website. There it is there. It's just a screenshot, you can't click it. But it's there now for your interest, and you can click on that. And if you go inside, you'll see the 2 SIGs we have already, which will be launched today, the Scale Up Physical Activity SIG and the Physical Literacy SIG. At this point, there's not too much there. There's a bit of information and some contact details. So if you are interested in these SIGs, that's where you go to contact the people. But we'll hopefully be building on this as we go, in addition to having some sort of way of expressing interest in a SIG for new members as they enter the society. So now that's the end of my background. I would like to hand over to Harriet and Karen, who'll be speaking about the physical literacy SIG. So I will stop sharing my screen. Karen and Harriet, over to you.
Yep. Thank you. Okay. Thanks, Scott, for that introduction. Yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the scaling up physical activity, or the SUPA SIG. I'm just going to briefly go through why this is even an area that we think is important, what sort of we know a little bit about in the field, and what our SIG plans to do, and then put a call out because we'd love to have some new SIG officers and some members. So myself, I'm chairing the SIG. Karen Lee's also on the call and will help answer any questions, is co-chairing. And we're just talking today on behalf of our SIG leadership team. So I think it's important just at the get-go, just so everyone's on the same page, to sort of provide a definition of what we mean by scaling up. So what we're talking about is deliberate efforts to increase the impact of a successfully tested intervention, to benefit more people, to essentially to widen its reach. There's no current definition of what is determined as scale. Is there a certain number attached? It very much depends on the context. But in terms of successful scale up, it's when an evidence-based intervention becomes integrated within a system sustainably, so it has a long-term health benefit. And in physical activity in particular, there are a minority that have actually reached this successful scale-up status. So there's a lot of literature around scale up, and Karen and I sort of put together what we thought were the three main reasons why this should even be an issue and why we should be interested in focusing on it. Is obviously it's critical for achieving population health outcomes. Many interventions are developed and tested. They remain efficacious, but they never either become tested in real world settings, and those that do, again, even fewer become successfully scaled up and adopted by governments that are widely rolled out. There's also some contentious issues around the fact, should all interventions be scaled? And then there are some that are scaled that maybe need to be de-implemented because they aren't evidence-based. So there's a lot to unpack in scaling up, but ultimately, if we want a population health outcome, which is a core goal of ASPA and physical activity, then scaling up has to be part of that. And lastly, in terms of the research, one of the Lancet papers on scaling up in physical activity said the science of scaling up really remains a nascent field of research. So to date, it's really been embedded in implementation science, which is really a large domain and field of expertise. But to scale something up is quite different to just implementing it in practice, and implementation at scale is not the same as scaling up. I'm not going to go into all the differences right now, but it's just to illustrate that it is a different area, and so it does require a different focus and has different challenges. The other sort of main reason is the global importance of this and the timing of the ASPA launch. Now, the WHO have really, for more than a decade, they've been calling for better and faster approaches to spread and scale interventions. And in 2018, we saw the launch of the Global Action Plan for Physical Activity. And within that, there is a core principle to accelerate and scale implementation of resources that are required for population change. And this was great to have this really explicitly stated, because it's defining this as a major focus globally. We have to be getting better at these population-wide initiatives. In saying that, the WHO have produced a number of resources over time. This isn't every resource that's available for scaling up. These are the ones that are sort of commonly used. The practical guidance for scaling up health service innovations is one of the most comprehensive scale-up resources. That's from 2009. So this is how long these resources have been available, and yet still we struggle to scale interventions. And look, these resources are, they're fundamental in terms of providing a systematic way to ascertain if certain parameters exist before scaling, during scaling, what their influence are. They're very, very useful for planning. However, more and more research into scale up is sort of starting to suggest that there's other factors, very much contextually, but factors that don't necessarily align with the prerequisites as such that are in these planning documents for implementation scale up. And it's not to say that they're wrong, it's just that there's so much more we need to understand, and the reasons why some interventions are adopted and widely rolled out. So it really just shows that there's a massive opportunity for us to do a lot more in this area and leverage off these existing documents to sort of find out, are there leverage points that we should be focusing in the field and in practice, and what can we learn from both? So in a sort of nutshell, Karen and I decided not to go too heavy on the background of scaling up, but rather sort of simplify it into what are the core issues. And I think that the three main things that we do know is that scaling up it's fraught with complex challenges, and these are political, environmental, social. They're often completely unrelated to the intervention itself. It's actually the environment and the implementation context that an intervention is put into. And largely these are amplified at scale. It requires heavy integrated working of agencies across multiple sectors, and not just in health. So it's not something that can be driven from a university and just the intervention gets pushed out wider. That does happen, and it has happened, and I'm sure there'll be examples where it's worked, but by and large, it requires a large commitment from stakeholders in and outside of government. There's also, to date, been a sort of lack of dedicated focus on scaling up in physical activity specifically. There's other areas where scaling up is much further ahead, in particular in agriculture and environmental sciences. Scaling up is quite, it's much further progressed in the field, so much so in nutrition as well. However, we've tended to integrate it within implementation science, which is absolutely fine, and it is an aspect of implementation science. However, implementation science, traditionally typically presents scale-up models as fairly linear. So you take an intervention, you test it in a trial, test it in the real world, widen it, offer it to more people, and that's the sort of scale-up model that we tend to follow. And that can be perfectly acceptable in many situations. However, physical activity is a really complex behavior, and what we're seeing is actually more complex sort of systems approaches, maybe another way of looking at scaling up, and implementation science traditionally tends to be slightly more linear. So it's not to say this is a bad thing, it's just to say this is a really big gap, and the SIG, we feel, is a really great opportunity to explore this a little bit more. So the objectives of our SIG are really we want to integrate a research practice policy platform and connect individuals across different settings and regions. We want the experiences of people in the field. This isn't an academic exercise, as Scott illustrated to begin with, but it's really the four main things are to advance our understanding, improve outcomes, and generate evidence on scale up for the field. So that's the kind of practice and research sort of area. Promote and enable networking and collaboration. We historically work in silos, and so if this SIG was able to provide an opportunity for people to get together and just spark ideas and start a connection, then we've been successful. We also want to support translation and dissemination of research and practice recommendations. That's one of the core objectives of ASPA, so we align with one of their goals. And we think it's important to provide skill development, training and mentoring opportunities. As Scott said, this is aimed at ECRs, at early career practitioners, and we want to use this as a way to build capacity, but also provide leadership opportunities for more junior staff members to have some involvement in advocacy and report writing, policy influence, etc. So I'm not expecting anyone to read the content of these slides, but it's really just to illustrate that we have three different areas and three different lenses that the SIG will take. So research, practice, and policy. And these are the type of topics we plan to cover. And this isn't exhaustive, and we plan to be guided by our members as to what they're interested in and what's relevant. But essentially, it's to show that we're planning to cover all three areas, but we're not treating them independently. So there'll be some aspects that are relevant only to policy and may only be relevant to research or practice. However, it's by combining the experiences of those three lenses across the Australasian region that we think is a real strength here, and what is a core goal of our SIG that will be quite committed to ensuring happens. So we'll plan to contact our members mostly via social media, e-newsletters, and if we're able to, in a face-to-face annual ASPA conference or online. You can follow the ASPA activity on Twitter and with our hashtag ASPA SUPASIG. And at some point we will be having a link when you register with ASPA to join our SIG, but as Scott said, there is now a page where we will be uploading information. But really the main upcoming events that we plan for this year, we'll have a newsletter coming out in the next few months. In the future, it might be Member in the Spotlight, interviews with particular individuals that are leading work or involved in important initiatives, sharing latest research, initiatives in the field. We have a webinar series planned at the end of this year. We'll be doing a state of play in the field. This is just like a launch webinar, just to sort of say this is what's happening, this is what's going on, and having a panel representing the Australasia region. And then in future webinars, we might have a debate webinar, postcards from Australasia, where we offer up the opportunity for, groups and organizations in different countries to really lead a webinar and showcase the work they're doing in their country and what we can all learn from that. And then at the very end of the year, we plan to have our inaugural SUPASIG conference meeting at the ASPA conference. Hopefully the day prior, we'll do a scale-up satellite meeting. So this will be on the 18th of November. And this will just be in Melbourne. However, at the main conference meeting on the 19th, we'll have an in-person and online event at Melbourne, Sydney, and Newcastle. So yeah, we'll have representation from all those sites with involvement from our SIG, and we'll have some sort of SIG activity and hopefully a social event. And it's really just to meet and start getting the networking going. So I thought I'd just end on our leadership team. So currently Karen and I are leading this. So as a very brief background, my area of research is scaling up in physical activity and nutrition, and particularly around planning guides and frameworks for scaling up, using systems approaches and trying to understand mechanisms of scaling up. Karen is about to complete her PhD in scale up, and previously she also worked in practice in the public and private sector in health consulting, and her PhD is looking at how to improve scale up for population health interventions, but also to ensure that practical tools are developed to guide scale up to inform policy and practice settings, that these are relevant. We also have some SIG officers, so Sam Gianni and Joe Chow. And look, we would absolutely love more SIG officers if anybody's interested in being involved. We have representation as academic officers, student officers, and we're really looking for practitioner officers. So I will leave with this last sort of sign off that if anybody would like to be involved in the leadership team of the SIG, simply joining our mailing list, it's completely free, and we can share information with you. Or if you want to have your work showcased because you're working in scale up or implementation, please email Karen and we can somehow get you involved. So thank you for listening, and Karen and I will happily answer any questions.
Thank you, Harriet. Very interesting. So just to remind you that we have a question and answer panel here down below at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So, and we also have a chat panel. So if you do feel like posting a question, comments, requests for clarification, please do so. I'll give you a few seconds to do that. If anyone has anything they'd like to address to Harriet or Karen. Of course, feel free to post questions as we go through the session. Lisa and Pierre will begin their session soon. So if there is a question that even pertains to Harriet and Karen's SIG, please feel free to post it there and we'll come back and address it after that session. Okay, there's nothing right at the moment. I'll hand over to Lisa and Pierre. Perhaps you could begin your session.
Thank you, Scott. So I think Lisa's going to share her screen, although I did just see a comment that you might have some unstable internet, Lisa. So we'll see how you go. And if it's an issue, I can probably do it from this end. There we go.
I'm just going to say, Pierre, that my sound keeps dropping out. So if it comes to my bit and I don't speak, just carry on, but I'll try to.
Will do. Will do. Fantastic. Well, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today. So Lisa and I, we're just going to quickly introduce ourselves, talk a little bit about physical literacy in the sense of the momentum and the work that's taken place, particularly in recent years. We sort of feel that there's been a lot of effort in this space recently, and then we'll tell you about why we came together and established this SIG and what we're hoping to do moving forward. So Lisa, if you want to click through, I actually think it might be sharing the wrong one. Lisa, if while I speak, if you want to try and go to display settings and flick the screen over, switch over again, because it's showing your notes there. But I'll persevere because we can see the content, so that's fine. So my background, the reason that I'm involved in this and working with Lisa stems from my time at Sport Australia, where I spent the last couple of years while I was there as Director of Physical Literacy Leadership and driving a lot of the work around policy and practice and engaging the academic community as well. But I've had nearly a 20-year career in community sport roles at the Sports Commission or Sport Australia in the sector directly, and more recently moving into some different work with a range of different organisations, including Special Olympics Australia, where I head up the schools and participation programs. Thanks, Lisa. In terms of the journey of physical literacy, if we get that chronological list, there we go. So a lot of the work that we led during my time at Sport Australia really kicked off in early 2016. And that's when the Sports Commission, now Sport Australia, decided to engage Richard Keegan, Dean Dudley and Lisa Barnett as lead researchers in this space. And the scope of that work was to define physical literacy for Australia. There's obviously a range of definitions and ways of interpreting this at times complicated construct. So we wanted an Australian definition and a set of standards or guidelines that would help people to understand and implement a physical literacy approach. That led to a range of academics coming together under their guidance, and I'll let Lisa speak to that in a little while, to essentially release a definition of physical literacy for Australia, a supporting consensus statement, and then a release of what was called the Physical Literacy Standard, comprising of the 4 domains and, at the time, 32 elements. The work then continued to do some consulting and gain some feedback on the standard itself. And in the meantime, many of you would be aware that the Australian Sports Commission did the change to Sport Australia in terms of the outward-facing name, launched the first national sport plan titled Sport 2030, which explicitly called out a need and a desire to improve physical literacy, particularly around children and young people in Australia. And that's when the team that I led was formed early in 2018 to drive the physical literacy agenda. So in terms of the work, there were some pilot programs that came on and wanted to use the physical literacy standard that was developed across a range of settings that expanded to education, to high performance environments, as well as to community sport and active recreation. And the widespread consultation and garnering of feedback continued for a period of time. My team was then able to re-engage with the academics, go through all of the feedback and work to land and launch the physical literacy framework as we know it today. The key change, and I'll get Lisa to just flick the slide over here, the only key change from the draft standard is that we went from 32 elements down to 30, and a couple of them were rejigged, so that, as you can see on the screen there, without going through the finer details on this call, we have a core group of individual elements that can be joined together in a range of different ways, and these capabilities can be developed in a range of combinations through a range of different movement sequences and patterns to essentially create a holistic development opportunity for an individual. So that's the framework that's now in place in Australia. Through the process, we work very closely with colleagues from New Zealand, particularly Sport New Zealand, and some academics that are based at universities across New Zealand, and we're able to really come out with what I think is a good agenda for physical literacy and build that momentum based on what was happening internationally. So the framework itself has got a lot of layers of detail. The stages of development, as you see on the screen there are 5 stages that an individual progresses through for all of the 30 elements. The thing that we obviously focus on from a physical literacy lens is that we never assess an individual's physical literacy based on their age or their school year, the grade that they're in. It's a very unique individual and lifelong journey, and we always look at the progression and regression of an individual's journey. And Lisa, again, will talk a little bit about some of the assessment tools that the broader group has been able to pull together. Thanks, Lisa. I think the third image we've got here might be of one of the pages from within the framework. So in terms of the resource itself, it outlines the framework and the stages of development, but then also breaks down, I think it's 1 page per element on exactly what that can look like at each of the 5 stages, and provides a definition and some practical examples of how that may progress through the foundation and exploration phase, through into stage 2, 3 and onwards. So that's the framework. We then, so that was launched in 2019. Then the momentum really started to shift, because having the definition and framework in place meant we were able to start developing tools, resources to activate a physical literacy approach. So from 2019 onwards, a lot of work started to come out, which included a position statement on physical literacy. The important thing about that is that it actually garnered support from sport, health and education sector organisations. And it was the first time that there was a sense of unity in a developmental framework, what I like to say, a common language for sport, health and education to speak about the same aspirational goals of improving physical activity output, but doing so by developing the individual. So that came out, as did a whole lot of website-based content, videos. There was a physical literacy guide for school, which is still being used and is growing in its popularity and use across schools in a range of education directorates. A number of resources have started to be mapped to the physical literacy framework. So historically, we would map resources to the PE curriculum in many cases. Now we're actually looking to add to that by mapping to the framework. And probably an important one for program designers or product designers is the product alignment guidelines that are now in place that really enable organisations to design, develop and or review programs with the lens of developing physical literacy. The Sport in Schools program, which is a national facing program, federally funded, has run a pilot looking at a whole of school approach to developing physical literacy. And then towards the end of 19, I like to think it wasn't financially driven, even though it may have been. But due to the success of the team and having landed the framework in particular, it was felt that we no longer needed a standalone physical literacy team. And so the team was disbanded. I moved on from Sport Australia, and the work was absorbed in the broader participation team, as it rightly should have been at some point in time. And we've continued to see a range of toolkits for school and community clubs, community sport club settings be released. So a lot of work still coming out. But ultimately, and the reason that Lisa and I are here, is that activating physical literacy and championing the physical literacy conversation really sits with individual organisations, with individuals that are interested in this area. And that's ultimately what sparked the initial discussion that Lisa and I had, was how do we continue to play a leadership role, an advocacy role, a championing role of disseminating research and information and best practice around physical literacy. And so we felt that doing so through ASPA via a special interest group would be the logical way to do it, aligned with ASPA's vision to bring together academics, practitioners and policymakers. It sits nicely with the physical literacy work that we've both been involved in. And so here we are launching the SIG, and we've already had an initial meeting where a lot of people joined us. So we know that there's a lot of interest, and hopefully on the back of today's session, we'll start to get people formally connect, particularly in our leadership group. So Lisa, hoping that the internet is working for you, I'll throw over to you to do your part and then to tell everyone about the SIG.
Yeah, look, I'll try my best. I lost sound a few times there and froze, and now I'm using my phone internet. So if I drop out, you know why. So yes, Pierre's given a great background, and I'm really excited to be working with him on this. And as you can see, we've already worked together for some time, but we really are aspiring to those ASPA goals of having the industry academic collaboration, and that's what we're really looking for here. So just a bit about me. I guess I'm bringing up the academic side of things, but I actually came from industry. So my background was in health promotion and public health before I was an academic. My core areas of research are children's motor skills, but also their perception of their motor skills, and coming from that, physical activity interventions. But in the past 5 years, you can see I've become interested in physical literacy, which incorporates motor skills and perception. So I'm seeing it as a more holistic and larger viewpoint of an area that I've already been driving. So you've already seen a bit of the background to physical literacy in Australia, and heard a little bit of, I think Pierre mentioned New Zealand at some point, and I know there's quite a bit happening in Asia as well. So we're also really excited to expand that, probably what's quite an Australian perspective today, to Australasia. That's our definition of physical literacy there. And I guess, like Harriet, we don't want to go too much into the topic area today, but just that we really see it as a broad approach and an exciting, possibly different way of repackaging what we need to be physically active across the life course. So my background in physical literacy was coming on board at that point in 2016 with Richard Keegan and Dean Dudley, where we developed the definition for Sport Australia. And this is the group of academics and stakeholders that we had involved that gave us input. So that was an exciting and interesting process. And if you'd like to read about it, you can. And then we drew from the expertise of that original advisory group to publish another paper discussing measurement approaches, because whilst it's nice to have this holistic view, how do we actually measure this construct? So that's another interesting aspect of what we are grappling with and what we hope the SIG might want to grapple with. And more recently, myself and a Deacon team were funded to develop a pictorial tool for young children's self-report of their physical literacy. So this is one way to think about the measurement, and that's been a really exciting project as well, because we contracted an artist and worked with them to try and develop a character that was not of a particular gender and was not of a particular race, because we're trying to have something that was appealing to children from different cultures and different places and not having to identify as a boy or a girl. That was an interesting brief for the artist, and we wanted all those 30 elements of physical literacy to be represented, and some of them are quite complex, like self-regulation for a young child. We wanted to try and represent that in a way that children could self-report on. Again, I'm not going into details here. I'm just giving you a little bit of a flavour of my background. So that has been finished and was released earlier this year. That's our character, our gender cultureless free character. And we have a version for younger children and a version for older children. And so we're really excited by that. We've already had Sport Australia could probably update me further, but I think there's been requests from 12 different countries just since the beginning of the year to use the instrument. So we're really excited now to progress looking at the validity of that. And we're also excited to think about that being used in practice and in industry, and what we can do with measurement in terms of physical literacy. So that's a bit about me and a bit about Pierre, but ultimately there's so many things that we could do with this SIG. We're hoping it'll be a real think tank. It'll be a chance to get together industry and researchers to collaborate in a meaningful way. So we're not just sitting there writing papers that don't have any reach. We want to actually get things out and practice. So similar to what Harriet's talking about as well, really, we could have a combined SIG with both of our interests, having webinars on topics that are of interest to people that are in the SIG. And again, like Scott said, there'll be people that are members, but also people that may just want to come in and access a webinar at a particular point in time, and we really want to reach out to those people as well. There might be points of advocacy. There might be case studies of physical literacy and practice that will assist those in sport or education or other fields. So there's lots that we hope we can do. So we've started the ball rolling, but we really hoping others will want to join us. We hope that you can give us an expression of interest. Let us know what skills and experience you can bring. And we're really interested in a range of skills and background, industry and academic, early on in your career or later on. You will need to be a member of ASPA to be part of the leadership group. And we welcome you to contact either Pierre or myself, and we'd love to have you on board, and really excited to really get this moving. And I'll just see if I've got one more slide, and then see if Pierre wanted to add anything as well. So I guess just to finish off, if you are interested in being part of the leadership or being really formally involved, join ASPA and indicate that you are interested. If you think you'd just like to see what else we do, that's fine too, and you can just wait and see, and we'll still let you know, because we have all the people that have been part of a session we had last year. We've got your emails, so we won't forget you, and we'll keep advertising so you know what we're up to. And we really look forward to collaborating. Is there anything I missed, Pierre?
No, not at all. I think we've covered everything. If there's any burning questions, we're happy to address those now. Otherwise, as Lisa said, really looking forward to people reaching out to put their hand up, either to be part of the leadership group or to simply be involved in the SIG in any other way. Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Pierre. Thanks, Lisa. Appreciate that. Yes, if you have any questions or comments and you want to get an answer now, please feel free to post a message in the chat box. In the meantime, I'm going to share my screen for the final part of the session. And yeah, a call for new SIGs. So some of you here will have been part of the physical literacy or the SUPA SIGs already. Some of you might be interested in a new SIG or creating a new SIG. And so there is a bit of a process that we've gone through at this point, which I'm just going to walk you through at the moment, should you be interested. So the first thing is to really discuss your idea with your colleagues. So obviously, it's great if you're an individual who has an interest in a SIG, and we certainly can. It's certainly we still want to hear from you, because we can still plug you in with other people who may have also indicate an interest. But it is an advantage if you have a group already, or at least a small group of people that you know you work with, and you can come to the table with a good sort of starting point for your SIG. So it might be worth just having a quick conversation about the people you work with, preferably those again from other countries in the region, and just gauge their interest if they're willing to take a leadership role within the SIG. Once you've done that, please get in touch with me. Just by email is fine, or phone, or whatever you'd like. And what I normally do is just make a time to have a Zoom, or if you're in New Zealand, to have a coffee, and we'll just discuss the initial concepts. Have had some involvement with SIGs previously. I'm also the co-chair of the SIG committee for ISBIMPA, so have some experience in how different SIGs function. And so, yeah, I'm happy to share any ideas or any considerations I think you should take into account. And then finally, what we ask you to do is essentially prepare a brief rationale for the SIG that we can present to the executive committee. And so we do have a template we can provide that, when you get to that point, but essentially it'll be summarising the importance of the topic and why it should be the subject of a SIG, the proposed governance structure you have in mind, your expected outcomes, which include things like seminars, publications, potentially even grant applications, mentoring opportunities, those sorts of things. And related to potential funding input as well. And then we'll probably also ask for some CVs of the leadership structure as well. So that's what we've done so far with the first two SIGs. And so we can obviously provide some information about how they went about that process. But please feel free to get in touch with me at any point if you feel you have an idea. You don't have to go through all those stages. You feel free just to flick me an email and say, hey, look, I've got this idea. What do you think? Happy to discuss that further with you at any time. So, do I have any questions? Let's have a look. I don't think so. Is there anyone who has anything they'd like to add at this point? Is there anything the panelists would like to share about their potential experiences with other SIGs? I know some of you have been involved with ISBIMPA SIGs, and is there anything in particular you'd like to share with us, or those who may be considering being involved in a SIG or a new SIG? Things to think about?
I could probably add as my involvement with the ISBIMPA implementation and scale up SIG. I think if you're an ECR or an early career practitioner, so early career researcher or practitioner, I think these SIGs, they're not advertised as in this way, but they are a really good opportunity to get some experience in leadership or advocacy, but even just meeting people. We had lots of spin-off little projects. There were trips that were involved that came off funding we got through the SIG, that we got to do collaborations. There were lots of events where you got to network with other groups. And yeah, it is a core purpose of the SIGs, but I think that it can't be undersold, and it's invaluable. So if that's alone is your interest, say you're not massively interested in scale up or physical literacy, you sort of are, but you just really want to get involved in a group, I would encourage you to be involved for that reason alone. And as the society grows, more SIGs will emerge that may be in your topic area, but I think it's good to be general to begin with and just get your hand up. That would be my advice.
Thanks, Harriet. Yeah, we shouldn't forget that while these are professional organisations, one of the main outcomes of these SIGs is actually really fun. It's fun to hang out with people with shared interests, and it's fun to have these social events. So any SIG I've been involved with, it's actually been really rewarding just for that reason alone. So please feel free to take the initiative and get in touch with people who are establishing new SIGs, or either get in touch with me if you're looking to start one yourself. Okay, well, thank you everyone. I think we'll leave it there. Thanks to all the panelists, and thanks in particular to Sam, who does all the work behind the scenes and set this all up for us. Really hope to meet you all at some point in person at our various meetings, and later in the year we will have a ASPA conference, so hoping to see most of you there. But thank you for your attention, and look forward to seeing you again in future.